Laura had been standing at the kitchen sink, mindlessly scrubbing a plate with a sponge for several minutes. Early morning sunlight flooded the spacious kitchen of their home in a quiet suburb. The street was quiet, the neighbors had already left for their errands, and only Michael's car remained in their driveway. Laura herself didn't immediately notice that she had been rubbing the same spot on the porcelain plate for a long time. Her thoughts were far away. She was thinking about how quickly time flies. Not long ago, their eldest daughter, Ashley, ran around the house as a little girl, asking to be read a bedtime story. And now Ashley was studying at college in another state, and the house seemed empty without her. Only the youngest son, Josh, remained, but he had already grown up. This year he moved to high school. Very soon he, too, would leave the parental home. Are Michael and I almost alone? Laura thought with a heavy heart, feeling a quiet sadness rise up inside her. She was 42, and for the first time she felt acutely how quickly her youth had passed. The house was gradually emptying, and quiet evenings alone with her husband loomed ahead. This did not frighten her. She loved Michael. They had been together for more than 20 years, but something had been bothering Laura in recent months. She rinsed the plate and put it in the drainer. She heard footsteps behind her as Michael entered the kitchen. He appeared to have just showered. His hair was still damp, his cheeks were freshly shaved. He was wearing a light blue shirt and dark pants, typical office attire. However, something had changed in his appearance in the last few months, Laura thought. Michael looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes, more gray at his temples, and he smiled less and less. "Good morning," Laura said, trying to sound cheerful. She turned away from the sink and smiled at her husband. "Want some coffee? I was just about to make some." "Good day," Michael answered quietly, looking down. He walked to the table and laid his jacket on the back of the chair. "Coffee? Yes, perhaps that wouldn't hurt. Thank you." Laura filled the coffee pot with water and ground coffee, watching her husband settle into the dining room table. Usually in the mornings, he would scroll through the news on his tablet or check his email, but today Michael sat with his fingers laced together, staring at a point on the tablecloth. He seemed to be thinking hard about something. "Did you sleep well?" Laura asked carefully, closing the lid of the coffee pot. The machine hummed quietly as it began to brew coffee. "Huh? Yeah, fine." Michael perked up a little, looked at his wife, and tried to smile. "And you?" "I slept well, too." She smiled weakly in response and wiped her hands with a towel. She could see that her husband was deep in thought. They used to talk a lot in the mornings, sharing their plans for the day, discussing the news or Josh's school affairs. Lately, such conversations have died down. Laura felt that Michael had become distant. She didn't understand the reason, but she was becoming increasingly worried. There was silence for a few minutes, broken only by the grumbling of the coffee maker and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Laura, trying to ease the tension, decided to ask about plans for the weekend. "By the way, dear," she began softly, taking 2 mugs from the cabinet. "Do you remember that we're invited to the Stevens barbecue this Saturday? It's Mark's 50th birthday, and they wanted to have some friends over. We promised to come by." The Stevens? Michael frowned for a moment, as if trying to remember who he was talking about. Then he nodded. "Oh, yeah, of course I remember. Saturday, 5 o'clock, right?" "Exactly," Laura nodded, pouring fresh coffee into mugs. She placed 1 mug in front of her husband, on his favorite saucer with a thin gold rim. "I was thinking maybe we could bake a pie or bring a salad. What do you think?" "Yes, we could cook something," he responded absent-mindedly and immediately, without touching his coffee, stood up. "You know, Laura, I should probably leave earlier today. There's construction on the highway again, and my colleagues stood around for an hour yesterday. I don't want to be late." She glanced at her watch. It was only 7:30 m. Michael usually didn't leave until 8, but he had already picked up a mug of coffee, taking a big sip as he walked. "Are you running away already?" She was surprised. "You haven't had breakfast yet? I can make some eggs quickly." Michael shook his head, tugging down the sleeves of his shirt. "No time. I'll grab something to eat later." "Thank you, don't worry." He put the unfinished coffee back on the table. Laura did not back down. Maybe you'd like to take a sandwich with you. I baked a chicken yesterday. There's some leftover filet. You can. Laura, he interrupted, a little more sharply than he'd intended. No need, really. I'm fine. Just busy. She bit her lip and looked down for a moment, feeling a pang of resentment. She was just taking care of him. A year ago, Michael had eaten her homemade breakfasts with pleasure and joked that he couldn't start the day without her porridge. Now he preferred to leave hungry. Michael, noticing her expression, sighed and added more softly. Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. It's just that the office is a mess. The report needs to be finished by the end of the week. You know this, boss. He tried to smile, precision above all else. Laura nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course I understand, she replied quietly. Just take care of yourself, okay? You look tired. The husband looked away, taking his jacket and suitcase with his laptop from the table. Yes, I'm a little tired, but everything's fine. Don't worry. He walked up to her, kissed her on the cheek. His usual morning kiss had become quick, almost formal, in recent months, and headed toward the kitchen exit. Laura watched him go. Her emotions were fighting inside her care, worry, and a nascent resentment at her husband's coldness. She could see that he was holding something back, but she didn't know how to approach it. Questions like, "Are you sure everything is okay?" had already been asked, and each time he brushed her off. Laura was afraid to insist more. What if there really were difficulties at work? She didn't want to interfere. A minute later, the front door slammed and Michael was gone. Laura heard the car's engine rumble low and drive away from the house. The kitchen was empty. Laura sat down at the table across from her husband's cooling mug. He hadn't finished his coffee. The dark surface of the drink trembled from the refrigerator's subtle vibrations. Laura felt uneasy. She sighed, pulling Michael's mug toward her and cupping it in her hands. The coffee was still warm. What's happening to us? She thought anxiously. They'd had their share of ups and downs in their 20-plus years of marriage, of course. They'd raised children, paid off loans, and sometimes fought over trivial things like scattered socks or Michael spending too much time with his friends. But they'd always made up, shared their worries. Now she felt like her husband was closing himself off, carrying something inside. And this uncertainty scared her more than anything. Footsteps were heard on the stairs. It was Josh waking up. The 16-year-old son came down with a backpack over his shoulder, wearing headphones. Seeing his mother in the kitchen, he took off one ear cup. "Mom, hi," he muttered, still asleep. "Good morning," Laura replied, trying to sound friendly. "Would you like some breakfast? I can make some cereal and milk or some toast." Josh shook his head. "No, I'll eat at school, okay? The guys and I sometimes stop by a cafe before classes." "To that diner again?" She frowned. "All fast food, it's unhealthy, isn't it?" "Mom, everything's fine. I don't do it every day," the son responded, put his headphones back on, and disappeared into the hallway. "Josh," she called after him. "Wait, do you need a ride? I was planning on going out on business anyway." She stood up and followed him out. But her son was already in a hurry to leave. "No, no need. I'm on the bus with a friend," he shouted from the front door. "Bye." The door slammed again. The house was completely empty. Laura stood in the empty hallway, feeling useless at that moment. Her husband had run away. Her son hadn't wanted her help. Teenagers strive for independence, she understood. But today, the loneliness had hit her especially hard. Returning to the kitchen, she noticed Michael's jacket on the back of a chair, the same one he had forgotten in his haste to leave the house. The outer pocket of the jacket was slightly open. Her husband's phone was there. Laura was surprised Michael never forgot his smartphone. It was always at hand. He was probably in a hurry and left it with his jacket. She took the phone. The screen lit up from the touch. She couldn't unlock it, and she wasn't going to pry into his personal information. She just wanted to call her husband from the house, to tell him that the phone was left at home. But before she could put the device down, a notification suddenly appeared on the screen. A pop-up window with a message. Laura's eyes automatically scanned the text. It said, "Jen, meet me at the park today at 5 as agreed. Hope you can make it. Got some news." Laura's mouth went dry. The message was from a woman named Jen. "Meet me at the park today at 5 as agreed." She felt her heart skip a beat. The hand holding the phone trembled slightly. Who is Jen? Why should her husband meet her in the park, and what news are we talking about? Laura stood there holding Michael's phone, feeling the alarm rising inside her. Her first thought was to call her husband and ask what this all meant. But she stopped herself. If it was something harmless, he would explain it himself in the evening. But what if? What if not? She sank into her chair, staring at the message line until the screen went blank again. Her heart was beating fast now. Laura tried to think rationally. Maybe Jen was a colleague of his, someone he met with for work. Yes, that was probably it. The name sounded familiar. She thought she had heard Michael mention someone named Jennifer in marketing once. Perhaps this news is about a new project or office matters. But why then in the park and not in the office or a cafe? And why didn't he tell her? Laura shook her head nervously, feeling that she was winding herself up. No, she needed to calm down and not jump to conclusions. The whole secret was difficulties at work. Maybe Michael was going to be promoted, or on the contrary, laid off, so he was keeping it all to himself so as not to upset her ahead of time. Yes, most likely so. And Jen was helping him find a new position or sharing inside information. However, logic is logic, but the unpleasant chill inside did not go away. Laura took the phone to the hallway and put it on the nightstand. She decided that later she would take the smartphone to her husband in the office and at the same time check if everything was in order there. But before getting down to business, Laura sat in the kitchen for a long time, trying to shake off the oppressive thoughts. She wanted so much to believe that everything was fine, that her beloved husband was still honest with her and there were no secrets between them, that their family, so strong and friendly for so many years, was not falling apart before their eyes. Laura clutched the cup of coffee she had left in her hands and suddenly felt tears welling up in her eyes. It took an effort to hold them back. She stood up, exhaled resolutely, and began cleaning the kitchen, trying to push away the dark thoughts. One thought kept nagging at her. I hope this is all a misunderstanding. Michael turned the key in the ignition and the engine of his old Ford began to rumble. As he pulled away from the house, he glanced briefly in the side mirror at the front of his cozy home. Laura appeared in the kitchen window, apparently still standing there, perhaps cleaning up after breakfast. Michael felt an unpleasant sense of guilt. He had been cold to her again this morning. He did not want to act this way, but the worries and tensions of the past few weeks were sapping all his strength. Driving down a quiet, leafy street a block away, Michael took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Today was going to be a tough day for him, like every day lately. Although Laura thought he was heading to the office, he actually had no place to go. Michael had been fired 2 weeks ago. It happened suddenly and was a huge shock to him. The company where he had worked for more than 10 years was downsizing. He was one of those laid off. The CFO didn't like the latest quarterly figures for their sales department and blamed the manager, Michael. The day he was called into the HR department and handed a notice of dismissal, he was stunned, unable to immediately comprehend what had happened. They gave him a small severance pay, shook his hand, and gave him half an hour to pack his things. His colleagues were whispering behind his back. Someone came up, patted him on the shoulder, wished him luck, and Michael barely restrained himself from cursing and slamming the door goodbye. He arrived home earlier than usual, with a box of personal belongings from the office in the back seat. But when he saw Laura's happy face in the window, who had been busy in the garden that day, he still couldn't find the strength to tell her everything. She waved at him, so pleased it seemed that she had just found out that Ashley had received an excellent grade on a difficult exam. Laura was full of happiness and pride for her daughter, and Michael chickened out. He didn't want to spoil his wife's mood with his news. He decided, let her rejoice today, and he would tell her about the problems later, the next day. But the next day it became even more difficult for him to speak. And then again. 2 weeks passed like this. Every morning he put on a suit, took a briefcase, pretended to go to the office, but in fact he drove wherever he had to the library, to the shopping center, just sat in the car in the park, looking through vacancies on his laptop. He had already submitted dozens of resumes, called acquaintances, but so far to no avail. People over 40 are reluctantly hired for a highly paid managerial position. They prefer the young and energetic, as Michael bitterly noted. Lying to his wife was becoming more and more painful. Michael knew he was doing the wrong thing, but every time he looked into Laura's eyes, he couldn't bring himself to admit it. He was ashamed. It seemed that by losing his job, he had let his family down. Although Laura herself had said many times that money was not the most important thing for her, he knew how important stability and a sense of security were to her. Losing her job meant depriving her of a sense of security, frightening her with the unknown of the future. He wanted to find a new job first, so that he could immediately say, "Well, this is how it happened, but everything is fine now." At least, that was his initial thought. However, the days passed, and he did not find a new job. The severance pay would be enough to pay off loans and bills for a couple of months, and then there was uncertainty. Michael woke up at night in a cold sweat, thinking about the future. And yet, in the morning, he again played the role of a model worker, so as not to worry his wife. Now, driving towards the city center, he felt his heart heavy. A quarrel with Laura was brewing. He saw her hurt, her misunderstanding. She deserved to know the truth, but fear and shame were stronger. He stopped at a red light and rubbed his face with his palm. "I need to pull myself together," he thought. He had a meeting today that could change the situation. Jennifer, a former colleague from the marketing department, agreed to help. They had become friends 5 years ago on one project, and when she found out about his dismissal, she herself offered to help. Jen worked at another company. She had connections. She wrote yesterday that she had news. Hope stirred in Michael's soul. Maybe he would be able to get a job with them, or at least get a recommendation. The traffic light turned green, and Michael moved on. There were still a few hours left before his meeting with Jennifer. They had agreed to meet after her work, at 5 in the evening, in the city park near the fountain. In the meantime, he had to kill time somehow and try to work on his resume. He pulled into the parking lot of a small coffee shop he sometimes frequented with colleagues. The place was nearly empty this morning. Ordering himself a large black coffee, Michael sat down at a corner table overlooking the street and pulled out his laptop. The screen lit up Michael's worried face. He opened the folder with his resume. For the umpteenth time that week, he corrected the wording, adding fresh figures on his results for the previous year. Experienced sales manager with 20 years of experience. The first paragraph read, "Previously, this phrase made him proud, but now it seemed like a mockery. What good is an experience if you are out of work at 45? Michael sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose with his fingers. He needed to concentrate. He took a sip of hot coffee, trying to push away the rising anxiety. So, what was his plan for today? Send out a few more resumes, call a few agencies, and meet David at lunch. Yes, he had to write to David. David was an old friend of his. They had met in their youth, and now, although they did not see each other often, they had maintained a warm relationship. Fortunately, David now worked for a recruitment agency, a small recruiting firm, and could tell him where there were vacancies. Michael groped around the table for his phone so he could text his friend, but his hand found nothing. There was no phone. He was taken aback for a second, then patted his pants and jacket pockets empty. He had left his phone at home. An image popped into his mind, the device in his jacket pocket, thrown over the back of a chair in the kitchen. What a fool! Michael was usually a collected person, and now this. He chuckled nervously. The last thing he needed was to lose touch with the world. How was he going to contact David and Jennifer now? Well, Jen had an email address. He remembered her address. And he could try to find David through LinkedIn or write to his work email. Fortunately, he had his laptop with him. Michael opened his browser and went into his mailbox. There were no incoming emails, no responses from the companies he had applied to, no new vacancies from the mailing list. He quickly typed a letter to Jennifer, warning her that he was without a phone and would be at the agreed-upon location on time. Then he found David's company website and sent him a message via the feedback form asking him to call back on another number. He indicated his home phone number, which he knew by heart. I hope Laura doesn't answer if he calls, Michael thought with an unpleasant chill. His wife might ask why a friend was calling his home phone in the middle of the day. No big deal, though he'd say he wanted to meet up and chat. After all, friends sometimes called. With those thoughts out of his mind, he got to work. Michael methodically spent the next couple of hours browsing job sites, answering 3 more ads, even though the positions were clearly below his previous level. Better something than nothing. By midday, his coffee had gone cold and his stomach was hungry and empty. Michael decided to grab a bite to eat on the way to his meeting with David. They agreed to meet at 1 o'clock in the afternoon at a small bistro not far from David's office. Sandy's Bistro sat on the corner of 2 busy streets. The bell above the door jingled shrilly as Michael entered. The room smelled deliciously of fried bacon and fresh bread. Several customers sat at the counter, idly bantering with the waitress. Michael noticed a friend at a distant table, a short, stocky man with glasses who had already ordered a sandwich. David waved at him. "Hey, buddy," David said loudly as Michael walked over and sat down opposite him. "Long time no see." "Hi," Michael tried to smile. He was really glad to see his friend, but he wasn't particularly in the mood. The waitress came over to take the order. Michael glanced at the menu and pointed to the first turkey sandwich he saw. When the waitress left, David looked at him intently. "Well, tell me how you are. I was shocked when I found out about the dismissal. Vincent warned me. He also worked for you before. We still have connections. Listen, how are you holding up?" Michael chuckled sadly. "Well, that's good news. I'm holding on, trying to find something. I've been chasing vacancies from morning till night." David nodded understandingly. "I know, it's hard. I see guys our age all the time who suddenly end up on the street because of some layoffs. Never mind, it's on everyone's lips these days. It's easy to say, don't take it." Michael sighed and rubbed his temple with his fingers. "I have a mortgage, children, and honestly, it's a shame as hell. I've given so many years to this company." "I believe you," David nodded sympathetically. "I was thinking maybe I should try changing my field or consider a lower position. I have a couple of contacts in smaller companies." "I'm ready for a lower position," Michael nodded, "as long as they pay well. There are a lot of vacancies, but the salaries are so low that you can't feed a family." David pulled out a sheet of paper with printed job postings from the folder. "I've thrown something here, take a look. A couple of options for a sales manager, though the level is a bit younger than yours, but the company is stable. And also a department manager for a startup, but it's not clear how it'll go." Michael accepted the paper gratefully. While he was skimming the descriptions, his sandwich arrived. The friends were silent for a while Michael ate. He suddenly realized how hungry he was. The stress of the morning had killed his appetite, and now he was relaxed and devoured the food greedily. David leaned back in his chair, looking at Michael over the top of his glasses. "How is Laura? Does she know yet?" Michael paused for a moment, chewing his piece. He shook his head. "No, I haven't said it yet." David's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You've been hiding it for 2 weeks? You're brave, my friend, or stupid. Look, I understand. I don't want to upset her, but you know her Laura will understand." "I don't know," Michael answered quietly, looking down at his plate. "She's very worried about any instability. She's already going through a difficult time. Ashley left, Josh grew up. In general, I'm afraid this will be a big blow for her." "But by hiding it, you risk losing trust," David said softly. "Imagine how unpleasant it will be for her to find out that you've been lying for so long." Michael remained silent. Of course, he understood all this. Every night he imagined confessing to his wife and saw her disappointed face. He imagined how her eyes would fade. He simply couldn't bear this picture. "I'll tell you," he muttered, pushing away his empty plate. "Soon, I can't pretend forever." "That's right," David smiled slightly. "And we'll find you a job, don't worry. By the way, did you mention some meetings today?" "Yes," Michael nodded. "I met Jennifer Harris at 5. Remember she worked for us a couple of years ago? She's at another firm now, and I think she has some news for me. Maybe a position has come up." "Ah, Miss Harris, of course I remember," the friend grinned. "Such a red-haired, lively girl. She was a great girl. It's good that she doesn't forget her old colleagues." Michael smiled slightly crookedly. Jennifer had always been energetic, sociable, and she had a family, a husband, and a small child, as far as he remembered. The only thing he needed was for someone to think that there was something between them. Fortunately, Laura was never jealous without reason. Although lately, Michael noticed, she looked at him somehow warily. "Okay, then good luck at the meeting." David looked at his watch. "I have to run in 10 minutes. We have a call." The friends paid the bill and hugged goodbye. David promised to keep Michael updated on any job openings and repeated, "Tell your wife, don't drag it out." Outside, after the stuffy cafe, the air was pleasantly fresh. Michael spent the rest of the day in the city park, whiling away the time on a bench. He bought a newspaper at a kiosk, leafed through the news, nothing particularly interesting. Then he just sat, watched the children play on the playground, and mentally rehearsed the conversation with Laura. Maybe tonight, after meeting Jen, he would find the right words. By 5 o'clock in the evening, Michael had gone to the fountain in the center of the park. Rays of the still warm autumn sun were breaking through the crimson leaves of the trees. Jennifer, a tall, thin woman in her early 30s, was already standing near the fountain. She noticed him from afar and smiled, waving her hand. "Hello, Michael," she greeted cheerfully as he approached. "It's good to see you, even if it's not in the most favorable circumstances." "Hello, Jen," he said with a grateful smile. "Thank you for taking the time to meet." They sat down on the edge of the marble ledge around the fountain. Several children were running nearby, the splashes of water shimmering in the slanting rays of the sun. "Well, let's get straight to the point." She got to the point, lowering her voice. "I talked to my boss. We do have a vacancy planned, a sales group manager, exactly what you did, but on a smaller scale. It hasn't been officially announced yet, but my boss said that if there is a strong candidate, she is ready to consider it." Michael's heart began to beat faster, this time with joyful excitement. "Seriously? This is great news." "Yes, but you need to hurry." Jennifer nodded and rummaged in her purse. "Here's my boss's business card, Mrs. Holmes. You need to send her your resume today or tomorrow, and I'll personally put in a good word for you." He picked up a business card that read, "Karen Holmes, Director of Sales, Integratech." "Integratech," Michael muttered, remembering. "It's a big company, isn't it? They deal with medical equipment, don't they?" "That's right," confirmed Jen. "We are currently actively expanding the sales department, looking for experienced managers. I immediately thought of you when I heard." Michael almost felt the urge to hug his former colleague out of joy, but he held back and just smiled sincerely once more. "Jen, thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me." "I can imagine," she said softly. "I was laid off 2 years ago, if you remember, and you and the guys really supported me then. I won't forget that." Michael remembered that Jennifer had indeed been laid off during the first wave, and he had recommended her to a couple of places. It was a joy to realize that goodness was returning. They spent a few more minutes discussing the details. Jennifer explained what Mrs. Holmes was looking for and what to emphasize in her resume. Then she glanced at her phone. "Oh, I have to run to pick up the baby from kindergarten." They rose from the bench. Michael thanked Jennifer again and promised to send all the documents that evening. They briefly hugged each other as they parted, like old friends, without any subtext. When Jennifer disappeared behind the alley, Michael remained standing by the fountain, feeling relief fill his chest. There was a real chance to get out of a difficult situation. If he sent his resume tomorrow and met the day after tomorrow, maybe he wouldn't have to wait long for a new job, which meant he could soon confess everything to Laura, already having at least an offer in his pocket. With this thought in mind, he headed towards the park exit. He needed to get home quickly tomorrow. They had a planned party at the Stevens, and Michael didn't want any extra reasons for tension. On the way to the car, Michael suddenly realized that he hadn't talked to his wife once all day, and his heart was pierced by anxiety. What was Laura feeling now? Having seen him off in the morning, cold and distant, and he had left so early. Yes, he had to go back quickly and try to spend the evening with her normally, so that she wouldn't worry. Tomorrow he will tell her everything. Having made this decision, Michael even quickened his pace. Laura was the most precious person to him, and deep down he knew. He couldn't hide the truth any longer. He just needed to have time to fix everything, before it was too late. As the afternoon approached, Laura realized that she simply couldn't sit at home, lost in her anxious thoughts. After Michael left, she tried to do the usual things, dusting the living room, sorting out the laundry, but nothing helped to distract herself. The morning message from the mysterious Jen popped up in her head over and over again. Laura was restless. Finally, she decided to act. Michael had forgotten his phone at home. It was logical to take it to him at work. At the same time, Laura hoped to dispel her doubts. She would see her husband in the office, make sure that everything was okay, and perhaps talk to him about what was worrying her. If her worries turned out to be in vain, well, she would breathe a sigh of relief. Having made her decision, Laura grabbed her car keys and her husband's phone from the nightstand. She threw on a light jacket and walked out of the empty house, trying to keep her composure. On the way to Michael's office, he worked in a business center 20 minutes away. Laura tried to calm down. She tried several times to dial her husband's number from the home phone, but stopped herself. He wouldn't answer anyway without a mobile. She could call the office number, but Laura doubted that she would find him. What if he was in a meeting at that time or outside the office? Better to show up in person. She parked in front of a tall glass and concrete building with the sign of the company Michael had worked for so many years on the front. Laura got out of the car, her knees shaking slightly with nervous tension. The spacious lobby of the office center was bustling with business. People in suits were passing by with coffee and folders. A phone was ringing somewhere. Announcements were changing on the screens at the reception. Laura approached the reception desk hesitantly. "Hello," she said to the young man in the security uniform. "I'm looking for Michael Johnson. He works at Riverton Technologies, office on the 10th floor. I'm his wife. I'd like to give him his phone. He forgot it at home." The guard smiled politely, nodded, and looked at the list of employees on the monitor. "You said Michael Johnson?" he asked. "Let me check." Laura tried to breathe evenly, clutching her husband's phone in her hand. The administrator frowned. "Sorry, I can't find him on the list. Did he just get the job?" Laura blinked, confused. "No, he's been working here for a long time. For more than 10 years. Maybe you're looking in the wrong place. He's a sales manager." The guard ran his eyes over the screen again, then looked at Laura with regret. "I'm very sorry, madam, but I don't see such a name among the current employees." Laura felt a chill run down her spine. "It can't be," she whispered. "Perhaps you spelled it wrong. Johnson, Michael Johnson." The man shook his head. "I checked my last name. Maybe you should check with the company itself." He gestured towards the elevators. Laura hesitated, trying to process what she had heard. "What do you mean, not listed as an employee? A mistake? Or?" Her palms were sweating. Thank goodness the young man was understanding and offered help. "Let me call upstairs," the guard suggested. "What's the name of the department manager or secretary I can contact?" Laura racked her memory. She remembered that Michael's boss was named Mr. Harper. "Try contacting Mr. Harper's office," she asked, her voice shaking. The guard dialed the number. He waited for a few seconds, then spoke. "Hello, there is Mrs. Johnson at the reception, Michael Johnson's wife. She would like to meet him." "I understand. Yes, I will pass it on." He put the phone away and turned to Laura with an apologetic look. Mr. Harper's secretary said that Michael Johnson no longer works for their company. Unfortunately, she is not authorized to provide details. Laura's eyes darkened. Her suspicions had been confirmed in the worst possible way, although in a different way than she had thought. Michael no longer worked here. Had he been hiding his dismissal from her? Laura felt that she had to go out into the fresh air immediately, otherwise she would suffocate. "Thank you," she squeezed out, mechanically returning the pass to the guard, which she hadn't even had time to receive. Barely aware of how her legs were carrying her, Laura left the noisy hall and went outside. Bright daylight hit her eyes. She reached the car and got behind the wheel, but for a long time she could not start the engine. Her hands were shaking. She stared ahead in shock. Her mind raced. How long ago? Why hadn't he said anything? What would happen now? Finances, the mortgage, Ashley's college fees. But what hurt most was the thought that her husband had lied to her, coldly and methodically, pretending every day that he was going to work. Laura remembered the morning shadows under his eyes, the constant fatigue that was what it was. He was probably beside himself, worried. But why didn't he trust her? Did he really think she wouldn't support him? Or did his pride prevent him from confessing? She was overcome with either anger or pain. Not even tears came. Laura was as if paralyzed. She took out her phone, hers, because Michael's phone was useless, and automatically opened the family chat in the messenger, where she and Michael usually exchanged notes on household trifles. The last message from him was yesterday. "Please buy some bread on the way home from work." So mundane, so usual, and not a word about the serious trouble that had happened to them. She threw her phone down on the seat. She wanted to scream or hit the steering wheel, but Laura just covered her face with her hands. She sat there for a few minutes, struggling with herself. Gradually, the initial numbness passed, replaced by feverish thought. Laura remembered the message from Jen. Now a lot became clear. Jennifer was the one from his office. It seemed that Michael really had met her on business. Surely she was helping him look for a new job. Meeting in the park, the news it all fit. So that's it. It seems like a relief. There was most likely no betrayal. But then why doesn't my soul feel better? Laura understood because in any case, her husband had broken trust. They had hidden the most important thing from her, preferring to consult with outsiders. It felt almost like a betrayal. She remembered that Michael had left very early today, perhaps because he didn't have to go to work and didn't want her to notice anything was wrong. He was probably spending the whole day somewhere, pretending it was a work day. Maybe he was sitting in a cafe or wandering around the city. This thought seemed especially painful. Her husband was somewhere alone, worried, and he didn't think it necessary to share them with her. Finally, Laura pulled herself together. Now was not the time to fall apart. She needed to figure out what to do next. She started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. She drove almost automatically, trying not to ask herself questions that had no answers yet. One thing was clear: they would have a serious talk when Michael returned tonight. On the way, Laura stopped at the supermarket. She needed to buy that bread anyway, and at the same time, she picked up some food for dinner. She wanted to do something before coming face to face with her husband. As she was leaving the store with bags, Laura heard a familiar voice. "Laura, is that you?" The woman at the entrance called out to her. Laura turned around and saw Carol, an old friend from her time working together at the local library. Carol was holding the arm of an older woman, presumably her mother, and smiling, though she quickly narrowed her eyes at Laura's worried expression. "Oh, hi," Laura smiled with effort, trying to hide her state. What a meeting. They hadn't seen each other for a couple of months, and usually Laura would have been happy to see her friend, but now she wanted to hide at home as soon as possible. "How are you?" Carol looked into her eyes carefully. "You look pale. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, it's okay," Laura answered too quickly. "It's just a hectic day." Carol nodded understandingly, but her eyes made it clear she didn't believe it. However, in front of her mother, her friend didn't ask any questions. "Well, let's call each other this week," she suggested. Maybe we can have coffee somewhere. Okay, Laura agreed. Keep in touch. They said their goodbyes quickly. On the way to the car, Laura found herself relieved by this fleeting conversation. Carol had always been sensitive, reliable. Maybe she really should tell her everything. But first, she needed to talk to Michael himself. When Laura returned home, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. She mechanically put the bags of groceries back in their places. The house was quiet and empty. The silence was pressing on her ears. Laura turned on the radio in the kitchen just to dilute the oppressive atmosphere. There was about an hour left until Michael's usual time of return. Laura wasn't sure when he would show up today. He could have been earlier since he wasn't at work, but he seemed determined to stick to his usual schedule so she wouldn't suspect anything. Ironically, that plan had worked until today. Laura sat at the dining room table, where she and her husband had barely spoken that morning. His mug of half-drunk coffee was still on the table, a reminder of what had happened. Waiting was unbearable. Laura walked from room to room, then sat down again, tried to read a magazine to no avail. Everything was boiling inside: resentment, anxiety, anger, and, at the same time, pity for her husband. What would she say to him? How would she start the conversation? She hoped not to break into a scream. Lost in these thoughts, she did not immediately hear the sound of a car pulling up to the house. Only when the door slammed and then the lock of the front door clicked did Laura start. Her heart began to beat somewhere in her throat. "Laura, I'm home," Michael's voice came from the hallway. She took a deep breath, trying to look calm with an effort of will. She stood up and went out to meet her husband. Michael stood there, looking around a little confused. He was holding his jacket, the one he had forgotten, and her bag of bread. He seemed surprised not to find his phone in his pocket. "Hello," Laura said quietly. The husband noticed her and forced a smile. "Hello, dear." They exchanged awkward glances. Usually at times like this, Laura would greet him with a joyful kiss, or at least a smile, but now she couldn't bring herself to do so. She simply stood there, arms crossed over her chest. Michael was the first to look away. He seemed nervous. He walked into the kitchen and put the bag of bread on the table. "I stopped by the store and bought some bread, like I asked." He began, trying to break the silence. "I saw," Laura answered quietly, nodding at the loaf. "Thank you." He glanced at her quickly. Laura knew he felt something was wrong, and how could he not feel it? The atmosphere in the house seemed to have thickened. Michael coughed. Listen, I just realized I forgot my phone. Have you seen it?" Laura silently pointed to the device lying on the table near the TV. The phone had been lying there all this time. Michael came over and took it. "Thank you," he said cautiously, as if not knowing what to expect. Laura kept her gaze fixed on him. Her silence clearly irritated her husband. "Laura," he finally asked quietly, taking a step toward her, "are you sure everything's okay? You're kind of—" He didn't finish, but Laura knew he'd noticed her distance. She wanted to pounce on him right then and there. "Why did you lie to me?" But something held her back. Perhaps it was fear of hearing the answers, or perhaps it was exhaustion from the day's events. "Everything's fine," she answered after a pause, smiling a little tensely. "I'm just tired today." Michael stared, as if trying to penetrate the mask. Then he nodded. "I understand. Maybe you should take a rest. I can order or cook something for dinner." Laura shook her head. "No need, I've already bought the groceries. I'll make pasta like I usually do on Fridays." As if nothing had happened. A simple phrase, but it had a bitter undertone. Nothing had happened, right? A shadow flickered across Michael's face, as if he had caught the hidden meaning. "Laura." He began and stopped. It seemed he wanted to say something, but he didn't dare. Instead, he tried to smile. "Friday pasta is good. I'm hungry." She turned to the stove, taking out a pot to boil water. She could feel her husband standing behind her, looking at her. His hesitation was infecting her. Just a few hours ago, she had been ready for a difficult conversation, and now she simply didn't know where to start. A deafening silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the sound of water as Laura poured it into the pan. "How was your day?" she asked unexpectedly to herself without turning around. Michael froze. It sounded almost mocking, although Laura didn't mean it as sarcasm. She really wanted to hear what he had to say. "In general, it's normal," Michael answered after a pause. "It's rich." "I see," Laura nodded under her breath, looking at the shimmering, rising bubbles in the water. She had to grit her teeth to keep from giving a bitter smile. "Rich? Yes, I can imagine." "And you?" he asked cautiously in response. "That's also quite good," she said briefly. Silence again. Laura dropped a pinch of salt into the boiling water, trying to control the trembling in her fingers. Now all her will was directed at not bursting into tears and screaming. This calm, polite exchange of words about the past day seemed almost absurd against the backdrop of the revealed lie. Michael suddenly stepped closer and gently touched her shoulder with his hand. "Laura, look at me." She froze but did not turn around. "Please," he whispered. Everything inside her was squeezed with pain and love at the same time. How she wanted to rush to him now, bury her face in his chest and cry, so that he would calm her down, say that everything would be fine. But she couldn't. Resentment and mistrust stood between them. Laura turned slowly. Her eyes met his sad, tired, guilty. She understood it, and her heart sank painfully. He understood that he was deceiving her. He was ashamed. Maybe now he would dare to confess. She waited. For several long seconds, Michael was silent. His hand was still on her shoulder, shaking slightly. "You know," he began in a hoarse voice. Laura held her breath. "Stephen's party is tomorrow," Michael suddenly said in a completely different tone, removing his hand and taking a step back. "I'll have to remember to grab a present." He retreated. Was he scared? Changed his mind about telling the truth? Laura couldn't believe her ears. He was hiding behind trifles again. Not knowing whether to cry or scream, she just lowered her eyes. "I remember," she answered quietly about the gift, turning away to the stove. "Don't worry, I already bought a bottle of wine for them." "Great," Michael breathed out. "Thank you." He stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for something to happen. But Laura continued to work on her dinner, making it clear that the conversation was over, at least for now. Finally, she heard her husband come out of the kitchen and walk heavily up the stairs, probably to the bedroom to change. Only then did Laura let out the long, shaking breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding throughout this entire exchange. She felt empty. No, she couldn't speak today. The wound was too fresh. She needed to cool down a bit, collect her thoughts, and it seemed that Michael didn't dare reveal the truth either. Well, tomorrow after the party at the Stevens, they would have to discuss everything frankly. Laura had firmly decided this to herself. She couldn't delay any longer. On Saturday, late in the afternoon, Michael and Laura arrived at the Stevens house. Neighbors and friends were getting ready to celebrate the 50th birthday of Mark Stephen, an old friend of Michael's. The spacious yard behind the house was decorated with garlands, and retro music was coming from the open windows. The birthday boy himself was already busy at the barbecue, a tall man with gray hair at the temples, cheerful and talkative. "Mike, Laura," Mark exclaimed joyfully as soon as he noticed them near the gate. "Here you are. Come in quickly." He came over to shake Michael's hand and gave Laura a big hug. Mark smelled of smoke and signature rib sauce. "Happy birthday, buddy." Michael smiled at the birthday boy, taking a gift out of the bag, a bottle of collectible whiskey. "This is from us." "Oh, that's what I needed. Thank you." Mark patted him on the shoulder. "Come in, make yourself comfortable. The meat will be ready soon. Laura, there are salads on the table. You can get yourself a plate." Laura nodded and smiled as naturally as she could. She had been preparing herself for this evening all day, afraid that she would not be able to feign cheerfulness. But entering the circle of noisy guests, she mobilized her forces. Besides, many of these guests were her acquaintances. She did not want to attract unnecessary attention with her frown. There were already about 15 guests gathered in the backyard. Several of the friends' wives were bustling around the snack table, setting out dishes. The host's children, teenagers of about 16, were running around the yard, throwing a ball to each other. The festive atmosphere relaxed Laura a little. At least here she didn't have to talk to Michael alone. She went into the kitchen at home to drop off her container of homemade pie. Laura had baked cherry pie for the treat that morning. In the kitchen, she found Mark's wife, Katie, transferring chopped vegetables to a platter. "Laura, darling," Katie greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "Glad you came. Oh, is that your famous pie? I love it. Yes, I decided to spoil everyone a little," Laura smiled. "How can I help you?" "It looks like everything is almost ready." Katie waved her hand. "You can just take the ice out to the table in a bucket." Laura eagerly took a bucket of ice from the freezer. She wanted something to do with her hands. Soon the two women returned to the courtyard, where the fun was gaining momentum. Several guests were already holding glasses of beer or wine, laughing. Michael was talking with three men near the grill. Laura recognized Stephen's neighbor, Paul, and two other friends. She thought one was named Victor, but she didn't remember the other. They were talking animatedly about something, and Michael even chuckled at someone's joke. From the outside, it might have seemed that he was completely calm. Laura couldn't help but wonder, was he really that good at hiding his worries? Or had he himself become distracted from his problems here among his friends? She felt a strange mixture of feelings. On the one hand, she wanted her husband to relax for a while. He looked so tired lately. On the other hand, his laughter now pricked her. How could he be having fun, knowing how far apart they were now? Maybe Michael was just trying to keep up appearances in front of acquaintances, just like she was. Laura walked over to the snack table. Katie immediately poured her a glass of white wine. "Here, my friend, you need to relax a little. You're kind of tense." "Thank you, I'm fine," Laura said, but she took a sip of wine anyway. The tension really wasn't leaving her, and the cool drink helped a little. Near the table, two friends' wives, Julia and Marie, I think were talking animatedly about their children. Laura nodded politely to them, not really listening. She kept a sideways glance at Michael. He was still talking to the men, already holding a mug of beer in his hand. From his gestures, Laura guessed that they were discussing something about sports or fishing, in general, men's topics. "Laura, how is Ashley doing at college?" Julia asked, distracting her from her thoughts. "Oh, she's doing well," Laura replied, pulling herself together. "She's studying hard. She called the other day and talked about practical classes." "How quickly children grow, huh?" Marie sighed. "Mine just said yesterday that she wants a $300 dress for prom, and it seems like just yesterday she was still playing with dolls." Everyone laughed. Laura joined in the light conversation about the children, although her heart was not there. She found herself constantly looking for Michael with her eyes. He glanced in her direction from time to time. Their eyes met several times across the yard, and then they both immediately looked away. This silent contact only emphasized the distance between them. About an hour later, when everyone had had their fill of appetizers and the grill was browned, Mark called everyone to the table. The guests sat at a long wooden table laden with treats. Michael and Laura were next to each other, as befitted a married couple. Laura felt the warmth of his shoulder very close, but there was a wall of alienation between them. She lowered her eyes, trying to concentrate on her plate. Once everyone had filled their glasses, Mark stood at the head of the table, attracting attention. "Friends," he proclaimed loudly, smiling, "thank you so much for coming today. Honestly, I can't believe I'm 50. There were some joking shouts at the table. "You're still young. You've got your whole life ahead of you," Mark laughed. "Yes, yes," full of energy as a cucumber, he winked. "But seriously, at that age you start to value the most important things. Not a career, not money, although they are important, of course, but family and friends. You are all my second family. We have been friends for so many years. We have been through a lot." He put his hand on the shoulder of his wife, who was sitting next to him. "And especially my beloved Katie, without her, I would not exist at all," he joked, hinting at her concern for his health. "Just kidding." In fact, I want to thank her. You and I raised children, built a house, argued, and made up. All sorts of things happened, but you were always there. Without you, darling, I would not be who I am." Katie smiled, and they clinked their glasses to the cheers of the guests. Laura couldn't help but tear up as she listened to this sincere speech. She quickly looked away so that no one would notice the moisture. "Let's drink to our friendly company, to our family and friends," finished Mark. "To love that will overcome everything. To the love that will overcome everything." These words echoed with pain in Laura. She stole a glance at Michael. He, too, was clearly thinking about the toast. His lips were pressed together, his gaze lowered into his glass. Who knows what he was thinking about now? The guests cheerfully supported the toast, clinking their glasses. Laura sipped her wine, trying to keep a calm expression on her face. The food was delicious, friendly conversations were going on around her, but she couldn't get a bite down, she had no appetite at all. Michael, who was nearby, also ate little, mostly picking at his salad with his fork. "Well, is it tasty?" Michael suddenly leaned towards her, asking quietly. "Yes, very much," she answered just as quietly, without looking at him. "You barely touched it," he noted softly. Laura shrugged. "Not particularly hungry." Michael wanted to add something, but then someone opposite called him. Mike, old man, Victor, an old friend, raised a bottle of beer. "It's been a while since we crossed paths. How's life? How's work?" Laura felt Michael tense up next to her. She held her breath, waiting for his answer. "Work? Everything's fine," Michael responded casually after a split second. "Projects, clients, you know, the routine." Laura looked down at her plate. There it was, the lie, right in front of everyone, with a small smile and a confident tone. As if nothing had happened. She felt uneasy. She knew Michael wouldn't open up to people he knew at a party, but it hurt to see how easily he could keep up appearances. "I'm glad to hear it," Victor nodded. "There were rumors that you were making some kind of layoffs there." Laura caught her breath and looked up at Victor. Michael also turned a little pale, but quickly pulled himself together. "It happened, staff optimization. But fortunately, it didn't affect me," he lied calmly. "I see. Well, you have nothing to worry about. Such a specialist is worth his weight in gold." Victor grinned and moved on to discussing football. Laura could almost feel Michael exhale next to her. She sat with her hands clenched under the table so tightly that her knuckles were white. Rumors, so her friends had heard about the layoffs, but she hadn't. Everyone else probably knew, and her wife was the last one. It was humiliating. Laura suddenly realized that if she didn't get up from the table now, she might start crying in front of everyone. She quietly pushed her chair back and stood up. "Excuse me, I need to take a little walk," she said in a low voice, addressing Katie, who was sitting next to her. "Is everything okay?" asked her friend, looking at her pale face. "Yes, it's just a bit stuffy," Laura tried to smile. She walked away from the table, pretending to go and see the garden. In the back of the yard, there were old oak trees, and under them stood a swing bench. It was quiet here. The sound of voices was muffled. Laura sat down on the swing and hugged herself. Tears welled up in her eyes. Everything was boiling inside, resentment, anger, and sadness. How could Michael lie so easily to their friends' faces, and to her too? She heard footsteps approaching on the grass, but she did not move. A second later, Michael stopped next to her. "Laura," he called out quietly. She quickly wiped away her tears, trying to calm her face, and turned to him. Yes, the husband sat down on the swing next to her. They were silent for a while, only the night insects chirped in the bushes. "I'm sorry," Michael finally said hoarsely. "I know this is hard for you to hear." Laura smiled bitterly, looking ahead. "You have no idea how much." Michael lowered his head too. In the darkness of the garden, Laura could not see his face, but his voice sounded cracked. I'll talk to them, to all of them. I just didn't want to make a scene today." "Of course," she agreed wearily. "Why ruin a friend's holiday, right?" He clasped his hands, interlocking his fingers. "I understand that you are angry," he said quietly. and you have every right to be. Angry, she repeated bitterly. That's putting it mildly. You can't even imagine how I feel, Michael. She addressed him by name for the first time in a long time, and he flinched slightly. I'll explain everything, I promise, he whispered. Just let's do it at home, okay? Not here. Laura nodded silently. Yes, they couldn't talk here, in front of strangers. From behind the trees came the cheerful laughter of the guests. Apparently someone at the table had told a joke. The contrast between that festive part of the yard and this tense one was striking. I guess I should go back, Laura said, standing up. Otherwise, Katie's going to think I've fallen apart. Michael stood up too. He wanted to touch her, to support her, but he was afraid that she would pull away. So he just said quietly, Please hold on. Everything will become clear soon. Laura said nothing and walked back to the table. Michael followed, keeping a small distance behind her. They spent the rest of the evening in a state of constant tension. Laura barely spoke, only occasionally responding to the remarks of those around her. Michael was also tense and silent. The guests attributed this to fatigue or mood swings after all. Not everyone is obliged to be cheerful forever. As it got closer to 10 o'clock, Laura came up to Katie and quietly said that they had to take their leave. She had business tomorrow and needed to leave early. Of course, her friend was upset, but she didn't keep her. Mark warmly hugged them both goodbye and thanked them for coming. Take care of each other, he said as he left, as if he knew how painful those words sounded. Michael and Laura just smiled tensely in response. The drive home took half an hour. There was silence in the car. Laura looked out the window at the dark silhouettes of trees rushing by. Michael concentrated on driving. It seemed he tried to talk a couple of times, but changed his mind. It was clear to both of them. This conversation, serious and long, was better to postpone until they got home. When they finally entered the dimly lit hallway of their home, the tension was almost tangible. Laura leaned tiredly against the wall, taking off her low-heeled shoes. Michael closed the door quietly behind them and said awkwardly, Laura, maybe some tea or water? No need, she shook her head. I'm too tired. He stepped closer as if to support her, but stopped. Then, maybe we can discuss everything tomorrow morning? He suggested timidly. But it's really late now, and we've had a bit to drink. Yes, Laura answered quietly. Let's do it tomorrow. Michael seemed slightly surprised by her agreement, as if he expected her to start the conversation right then. But Laura had neither the energy nor the desire to argue in the middle of the night, when the emotions were still so fresh. They went upstairs. Laura went straight to the bedroom without even turning on the light and quickly changed into her pajamas. Michael lingered in the bathroom. Apparently, he was also getting ready to go to bed. When he entered the bedroom, Laura was already lying on her end of the bed, facing the wall. She felt the mattress dip under his weight as he carefully laid himself down next to her. They lay in silence in the dark for several minutes. Laura could not sleep. Her heart was pounding loudly. Blood was pulsing in her temples. Michael was also breathing shallowly, betraying his wakefulness, but neither of them said a word. Thus, in silence and anxiety, this difficult day came to an end, foreshadowing an even more difficult conversation ahead. The next morning, the Johnson house was eerily quiet. A faint light filtered through the cracks in the bedroom curtains. Laura lay awake, feeling the weight of a sleepless night. Michael seemed to be awake too, his breathing shallow and uneven. But around 7 o'clock in the morning, he rose carefully from his bed, careful not to wake her, and went into the bathroom. Laura closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The day had come when they would have the conversation she had been both dreading and waiting for. Her insides clenched with anxiety. Half an hour later, she came downstairs. Michael was already in the kitchen, standing at the stove in sweatpants and a t-shirt, stirring something in a frying pan. The stove smelled of scrambled eggs. Hearing his wife's footsteps, he glanced over his shoulder. "Good morning," he said quietly. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red. Stubble was sprouting on his cheeks. He obviously hadn't shaved. "Hello," Laura replied. She stopped at the kitchen threshold, not moving any closer. They looked at each other in silence for a few seconds. Michael looked away first and turned off the burner. I made breakfast, he said uncertainly, putting the scrambled eggs on plates. Would you like some coffee? Yes, you can, she nodded automatically. Laura sat down at the table. The thought was pulsing in her head. Well, now it's all about to begin, she thought. Her hands were cold, and she hid them under the table, clasping them together to hide her trembling. Michael placed a mug of coffee and a plate in front of her. He sat down on the chair opposite his portion. They ate in silence for a while. Laura had no taste at all, the bite barely went down her throat. Michael also ate without appetite. Finally, the silence became unbearable. Michael cleared his throat. Josh is still sleeping, he said quietly, more to break the silence. Laura nodded automatically. Their 16-year-old son usually slept late on weekends. It was a good thing he wasn't around. This was going to be a tough conversation. Michael looked down at his coffee cup. Then, as if making a decision, he looked up at Laura. I need to talk. Laura smiled bitterly at the corner of her lips. Finally, her husband winced at her tone. He spoke quickly, interlacing his fingers on the table. Laura, I'm very sorry that it happened. I behaved like a coward and an idiot. She looked at him silently, not saying a word. There was pain and guilt in his eyes, but it didn't bother her much now. Her own wound was too deep. I should have told you right away, Michael continued, but I was scared. Scared of your reaction, scared of my own inadequacy. Failure? Laura asked quietly. Did you think I'd think you were a loser? Michael closed his eyes for a second. I don't know. I felt like a failure myself. When I was fired, he smiled wryly, or rather, cut. I was crushed, honestly, and at that moment I didn't want to look you in the eye. You were so happy, proud of Ashley's success. I didn't have the heart to spoil all that. Laura was silent, clutching her mug with cold fingers. Michael had spoken frankly, but her heart had not calmed down over the past 24 hours. You kept quiet for one day, she said evenly. And then? Michael looked out the window. Outside, the sunny morning promised a hot day, and some birds were singing cardinals, probably. Then I didn't even notice how I got sucked into this lie, he said quietly. Every day I thought, just a little more, I'll find a job and tell you. I didn't want to worry you ahead of time. How noble, it sounded bitter. So, in order not to disturb me, you lied to my face for 2 weeks. Michael winced painfully. I deserved it. Yes, I lied. And I have no excuse. Laura felt a long-suppressed resentment building up inside her. She pushed her plate away from her, leaving the piece uneaten. You know what the worst thing is? She said, trying to sound calmer, although her voice was treacherous. It's not that you lost your job, and it's not even that we're now without a stable income and all our plans are at risk. The worst thing is that you decided to hide it from me, as if I were an outsider, as if we weren't family. No, that's not it. Michael began, but Laura continued inexorably, the accumulated words bursting out. All these years I thought that we share both joys and sorrows. Whatever happens, we are partners, we are together. And you didn't even give me a chance to support you. You just closed yourself off, made me look like a fool who doesn't understand anything, lives for herself, and doesn't know that her husband lies to her face every day. Laura. Michael reached his hand across the table towards her. Please don't say that. She pulled away, not allowing him to touch her. How can I tell you? Can you imagine what I went through yesterday when I found out from strangers that my husband had been fired and he hadn't said a word to me? I know, he pressed his palm to his forehead, wincing painfully. Believe me, I couldn't even imagine that you would go to the office. I'm terribly guilty. I can't be forgiven. There were tears in his voice, but Laura felt no pity. She felt a mixture of anger and pain. And that's not all, she said, standing up from the table. It was hard for her to sit still. Everything inside was boiling. She was overwhelmed with emotions. You know what I thought when I saw that message on your phone? Michael raised his head. What message? Laura smiled bitterly. From Jennifer. Meet me at 5 in the park, as agreed. Got some news. That's when I decided to go to you to take the phone, and at the same time figure out what was going on. Do you know what I suspected at first? Michael opened his mouth, but remained silent, as if stunned. He clearly realized what she was getting at. I thought you were having an affair, Michael, Laura said bluntly, looking at him intently. That you were seeing another woman behind my back. What? He turned pale. Laura, no. She laughed bitterly, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. What should I have thought? My husband is acting strange. He's distant. He's walking around gloomy. He's secretly meeting with some Jen. Jen is a colleague, Michael interrupted, pleadingly. Or rather, a former colleague. I've told you about her a couple of times. You must remember. What's the point, whether I remember or not? Laura waved it off. The important thing is that you chose to discuss your problems with her and not with me. Even if there is nothing romantic between you, and I hope not, the fact remains. You trusted a stranger, and you didn't say a word to your wife. Michael stood up, walking around the table. They were now standing opposite each other in the center of the kitchen, not touching, a strong sense of alienation between them. Listen, he said excitedly, holding out his hands, palms up, in a gesture of reconciliation. There's nothing between me and Jen, I swear. She just offered to help me find a job because she found out she was fired. Yes, I agreed to meet, but only for the sake of the job. It never even occurred to me to have an affair. Laura clutched her temples. It was all too much. She was tired, her soul ached. I'm glad at least there was no betrayal, she said wearily, but it doesn't make me feel much better. You say you wanted to protect me from worrying. But what happened? I spent a day alone, winding myself up, thinking God knows what. Thank you for your care, Michael. He took another step forward, and now the distance between them was reduced to a few centimeters. Laura saw up close how his lips were trembling. I'm so sorry, Michael whispered. I'll make it right, I promise. I was an idiot. I shouldn't have trusted you. Please, give me a chance to make it right. At that moment, the door upstairs creaked. Josh must have woken up and left his room. His footsteps sounded on the stairs. Laura and Michael simultaneously fell silent, turning to face the hallway. The son, in a wrinkled t-shirt and with his hair tousled from sleep, stopped halfway down the stairs, looking at his parents with wide eyes. Apparently, he heard their last remarks. Mom, Dad, Josh said hesitantly. You, what are you talking about? Laura felt the color rise in her face. How much had he heard? She exchanged a quick glance with Michael. He was the first to pull himself together. Josh, it's okay, he said, trying to sound calm. We're just talking. The teenager frowned, clearly feeling the tension. Are you talking? It looked like you were arguing. Adults have difficult conversations too, Laura quietly interjected, softening her voice. Don't worry, dear. This is our business. Josh looked from his mother to his father in silence. Laura suddenly felt uneasy. Her son looked confused and worried. She realized that their shouting, and they did raise their voices in the heat of the moment, might have frightened him. Okay? Josh finally said, looking away. If you're sure everything's okay. He hurried downstairs and walked past them to the refrigerator. He took a bottle of orange juice and a couple of pies from the table, apparently left over from yesterday. I'm going to see Tom now. We agreed to do a project, he said over his shoulder, avoiding his parents' gaze. I'll be there after lunch. Okay, Michael nodded. Just call me if plans change, okay? Yeah, Josh muttered. He quickly pulled on his sneakers, which were lying by the front door, and grabbed his backpack. As he was leaving, he turned around for a moment. Are you sure you don't quarrel? No, son, Laura answered quietly, forcing herself to smile. Don't worry. Josh nodded and slammed the door behind him. As soon as he left, Laura felt her strength leaving her. She sank down on the living room sofa, covering her face with her hands. A lump of tears rose in her throat, but she tried to hold on. Michael sat down next to her, but at a distance, not daring to hug her without permission. For a few moments they were both silent, digesting the interrupted conversation. "Well, I'll be damned, you woke the guy up," Michael said guiltily. "I didn't mean to." "Me too," Laura responded wearily, dropping her arms and leaning back on the sofa. She closed her eyes. "God, what have we come to?" Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and dropping his head into his palms. "Laura, I understand that one conversation won't fix everything. But please believe me, I never wanted to hurt you or betray you for a minute. I was just scared." "I've heard," she responded coldly. "You were afraid of losing face in my eyes." "Yes," he whispered. "I guess so." Laura looked at him. He looked so miserable at that moment, his shoulders slumped, his back hunched. This was not the confident Michael she had married. This was a broken, guilty man, and despite her anger, she still loved him. Conflicting feelings warred in her chest. She wanted to reach forward, hug him, tell him they could handle it. But she also wanted to scream in frustration. "I don't know what to tell you now," Laura finally exhaled. "You're asking for a chance to fix everything, but I'm not sure I can trust you again. At least not right away." Michael raised his head, despair in his eyes. "I understand. I will do everything possible to earn your trust again. Just say it you. You're not going to." He stopped short, but Laura understood. He was afraid that she was going to leave him, get a divorce. "I don't know," she answered honestly after a pause. "I don't know yet, Michael. Right now, everything inside me is all mixed up." She covered her eyes with her hand, and suddenly tears began to roll down her cheeks. All the intensity of the last few days burst out. Laura tried to hold back, but she couldn't. Quiet sobs shook her shoulders. The next moment, she felt Michael gently embrace her. For a second, she wanted to push him away. She was still angry. But the warmth of his arms reminded her of how he had always comforted her before. Laura buried her face in his chest and gave in to her tears. "I'm sorry. Forgive me," Michael whispered, stroking her back. "Please." She cried, expressing through her tears everything that had accumulated. "It hurt so much. I thought you didn't trust me anymore. I thought we were losing each other altogether." "No, no," he whispered hotly. "It's all my fault, but I love you, Laura. You are the most precious thing I have." He pulled back a little, looking into her face, wiping her wet cheeks with his palm. "I love you," Michael repeated firmly, "and I'll do everything so that you can trust me again. If you want, we'll go to a family psychologist, or I'll report on every step every day. Anything, as long as you're calm. Just don't talk about divorce, I beg you." Laura shook her head, sobbing. "I don't want a divorce. I just want the pain to go away." Michael gently pulled her close. Now she didn't resist. They sat in silence for a while. He stroked her hair. Gradually, Laura felt better. The tears dried up. She felt only a devastating weariness, but the tension gradually receded. Pulling away, she smiled weakly through the remaining tears. "Look at us." We started crying like children. Michael smiled sadly in response, carefully brushing a strand of hair from her face. "If it helps, cry. I'm here." Laura shook her head. "Enough. We need to somehow continue living." She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief and pulled herself together. Michael looked at her attentively. "What now?" he asked quietly. "What do we do?" Laura sighed and leaned back on the sofa. "Honestly, I need time. I can't just pretend that nothing happened. I'm hurt and offended." Michael nodded. "I understand everything." There was silence. Laura was thinking. She really needed some space to process everything that had happened. Maybe to be alone, or to talk to someone else like Carol. "I think I'll go out and get some fresh air today," she said hesitantly. "Maybe I'll meet a friend and just get away from it for a bit." A look of alarm flashed across Michael's face, but he nodded. "Of course, you deserve a break from all this, and from me too." "That's not what I meant," she said wearily. "I just need to think." "I understand," he nodded again. "I'll be home. If you need me, call." Laura stood up, feeling a little awkward. Michael stood up too. They still had a lot to decide, but right now they were both mentally exhausted. "I'll change my clothes and probably go," she said. "Okay," Michael tried to smile. "Be careful driving." "It's like my first day behind the wheel." She shook her head with a shadow of a smile. He looked down guiltily. Laura quietly left the room, heading upstairs to shower and get ready. Left alone, Michael sank back heavily onto the couch and ran his hands over his face. The conversation hadn't put everything back in place, but the first hurdle had been cleared. The truth had been revealed, and Laura seemed willing to give him a chance. At least she hadn't gone away completely. Now it all depended on whether he could regain her trust, and Michael was determined to do everything he could to achieve that. Laura parked her car at a low one-story house with a neat front garden. Her friend Carol lived there with her elderly mother. On the way, Laura called Carol, who immediately invited her to come over, having sensed on the phone that her friend was upset. Carol even canceled her daytime plans. Carol herself opened the door. She looked worriedly into Laura's face and immediately embraced her in a warm embrace. "Oh God, Laura, what happened?" she whispered. "You're all pale." Laura felt the lump in her throat again at the genuine concern, but she managed it by taking a deep breath. "Thank you for having me," she said quietly. "We really need to talk." "Sure, come in." Carol stepped back and let her in. "I just put the kettle on." The living room of Carol's house was cozy. A soft beige sofa, bookshelves along the walls, a bouquet of fresh daisies on the table. From somewhere in the depths of the house came the sounds of a television on. Carol's mother was probably watching a daytime program. "Mom, Laura has come to see me. I'll be in the kitchen," Carol announced loudly, looking out into the hallway. A faint, "Okay, dear," was heard in response. "She rarely gets up from her chair now," Carol explained in a low voice, inviting Laura to go into the kitchen. "Her bones ache, you understand. But thank God, her memory is still there. We talk a little." Laura nodded. Her friend had been caring for her mother, who was in her 80s, for several years. It wasn't easy, but Carol never complained. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and apples, as if a pie had been baked recently. Carol sat Laura down at the round table, putting the clean laundry aside as she went, and took 2 mugs from the cupboard. "Would you like tea or coffee?" she asked. "I have some chamomile soothing." "Let's have some tea," Laura agreed. "Thank you." When the tea had steeped and the hot cups were on the table, Carol covered her hand with her own. "Well, tell me," she asked softly. "What happened?" Laura felt her eyes begin to sting again. She looked down at the steaming mug. "Michael and I had a fight," she began quietly. "More precisely, we have a crisis, a very serious one." Carol chuckled sympathetically. "You and Mike? You always seemed like such a strong couple. What happened?" Laura slowly and in order told her friend everything that had accumulated over the past few days. The revelations were not easy for her. Her voice trembled every now and then, but Carol listened silently, without interrupting, only stroking her hand, handing her napkins when Laura could not hold back her tears at the moments about her anxiety and resentment. Having spoken, Laura felt a little lighter and at the same time empty. She wiped her wet eyes and looked at Carol guiltily. "I'm sorry. I must have completely fallen apart." "Stop it," my friend shook her head. "What are you saying? That's what friends are for." Carol took a sip of tea and was silent for a moment, collecting her thoughts. "You know," she began cautiously, "I see several things in this whole story. First, your Michael was, of course, stupid." Laura smiled bitterly. "That's putting it mildly." "Yes," Carol nodded. "He did wrong to hide such an important thing from you, especially for so long. Here, your resentment is understandable, and anger and disappointment all mixed up." Laura sighed heavily, clasping her hands around the hot mug. "Secondly," Carol continued, "I don't think he really means it. Men, they're sometimes afraid to show weakness, especially at our age, when a career is part of self-respect." "It occurred to me, too," Laura admitted. "He said he was ashamed to admit it. Well, Carol shrugged slightly. It's stupid from the outside, but I can understand. Remember my Robert? Laura nodded. Carol's ex-husband, Robert, had left her 5 years ago for another woman. He didn't tell me a lot of things either, Carol recalled with a sigh. Not about work, of course, but about debts. It turned out he took out loans to support his lifestyle, and he didn't say a word to me. I was the last one to find out when the bank called. It was so unpleasant I felt cheated on top of everything else. Laura shook her head sadly. I didn't even know about the debts. You were talking about something else then. It doesn't matter anymore. Carol waved her hand. What I'm getting at is that a lie always hurts. But it's good that Michael finally realized it, even if not right away. How is he now? Did he ask for forgiveness? Yes, Laura recalled the morning scene on the sofa and her lips trembled. He's very remorseful. He said he loved me, that he would fix everything. He was ready to do anything, just so I wouldn't talk about divorce. So he's afraid of losing you, concluded her friend. That's important. He made a mistake, but apparently he understands it and wants to make amends. Laura nodded, running her finger along the rim of her cup. I can see it. I guess that's true. But it still hurts so much, Carol. As if something between us has broken. I don't trust him anymore like before. What if something happens again and he stays silent? Trust is a fragile thing, Carol agreed softly. It's not easy to restore, but it can be done. I don't know. Laura shook her head. I'm not sure yet that I can. He didn't cheat, of course, thank God. But it almost feels like he did. Betrayed our dear ones. She felt tears welling up again. Carol hurried to sit closer and put her arm around her friend's shoulders. Honey, you're emotional right now. The wound is still fresh. Don't put pressure on yourself. You don't have to forgive him today or trust him 100%. Give yourself time. Laura nodded, pressing her cheek against her friend's shoulder, shaking slightly. Time, yes, she whispered. And let him try, Carol added. Let him prove by his actions that he deserves new trust. Since he was such a good fellow at lying, let him now be a good fellow and tell everything honestly. Laura smiled slightly for the first time. He promised, by the way, to at least send a diary of the report. He even offered a family psychologist if I wanted. Carol laughed quietly. Well, he was really scared since he agreed to see a psychologist himself. Usually, you can't drag men to a therapist. Laura allowed herself a weak smile, too. She pulled away, straightening up in her chair. Yes, he was seriously scared, she said in a more even voice. Anyway, I made it clear that it's hard for me now, but I don't want to get divorced. I love him, stupid as he is. I just need to come to my senses. Of course you do, Carol confirmed softly. So many years together, 2 children. Anyone in your place would be hurt, but still love. They sat in silence for a while. The sound of Carol's mother switching channels could be heard from her room. Apparently, the old woman had dozed off in front of the TV. Laura glanced around the cozy kitchen, familiar to her for many years. Here, she and Carol had drunk many cups of tea, discussing both business and family. How many times had Laura complained about some little things, and she never thought that one day she would come with such a problem. Carol, she began quietly, I suddenly realized over the last few days that my life is just my home and my family. When such a rift in the family happened, it was as if I was left without support, as if I had nothing of my own anymore. Carol listened attentively. Laura continued, choosing her words carefully. Before, the kids were growing up so many worries. Work. Well, I left the library because I couldn't keep up with either Ashley or Josh, and Mike earned well, so we decided that I would stay at home. But now the kids have grown up. Ashley is hardly around at all. She has her own life. Josh, at least he's home for now, but he's also grown up. He has friends, interests. They don't need me as much anymore. They will always need their mother, Carol said softly. Maybe, but I had too much free time. And when this happened with Mike, I realized that I had filled my whole life with only family. And where am I? She spread her hands, looking helplessly at her friend. When I was young, I had dreams, plans. I wanted to write a book, remember? Or at least advance at work. And now, I'm standing still. Not even standing still, a middle-aged housewife whose world collapses if her husband doesn't live up to her expectations. Carol squeezed her hand tighter. Don't say that. Being a housewife is also a lot of work. You've given so much to the children. But I understand what you mean. I became afraid that I alone meant nothing, Laura whispered. You mean, Carol objected seriously. Laura, you are a strong, kind, smart woman. You just had a period dedicated to your family. But that doesn't mean you can't do anything for yourself. Laura looked at her uncertainly. Do you think it's not too late? Well, to live for yourself. Carol chuckled. We are only 42, as if you are talking about old women. Of course, it is not too late, at least to start a new career if only there was a desire. Laura smiled slightly, feeling a strange relief from these simple truths. Speaking of career, Carol narrowed her eyes slyly. Our librarian Thomas recently retired, and the position of department head is vacant. I was just thinking about who to invite. Maybe you'll come back to us, huh? We miss you, and you've always been an excellent specialist. Laura raised her eyebrows in surprise. Really? I didn't know. But so many years have passed, I've probably already forgotten everything. Nonsense, you'll get the hang of it quickly. Carol waved her hand. Think about it. You don't have to go out tomorrow, but when everything settles down, you're welcome. Besides, you might feel more confident knowing that you can earn money yourself. Laura nodded, considering the idea. The idea of going back to work suddenly resonated with her in a good way. She had once loved her profession as a librarian, and the extra income would be a good thing for the family if Michael's new job didn't work out right away. I'll think about it, she said out loud. Thank you, Carol. You've helped me understand something. That's what best friends are for, she smiled, always glad. They hugged. Laura felt genuinely better. Of course, the anxiety hadn't gone away completely. There was still a difficult path to rebuilding the relationship ahead. But now, thanks to Carol, she clearly saw that life doesn't end with the current crisis, and that she had her own resources and strength to cope. After a little more small talk, Laura inquired about Carol's mother's health, and Carol told a couple of funny stories from the life of the library. The friends finished their tea. It was already past midday, and it was time for Laura to return home. Call me if anything happens, Carol said at the door, and remember the job offer. I have a vacancy for you. Okay? Laura squeezed her friend's hands gratefully. Thank you again, dear. You've been a great help. They said goodbye, and Laura got into the car. The bright afternoon sun poured through the window as she drove back. For the first time in days, she didn't feel the oppressive hopelessness. Yes, not everything would be okay right away. She would have to work on her marriage, on herself. But Laura was willing to try. She thought about what she would say to Michael. Perhaps she should talk calmly, without accusations, tell him how she felt and what she expected from him, and hear his plans. If they both wanted to save the family, they would have to work together. While she was thinking like this, she didn't immediately notice that the car had pulled up to their street. Laura abruptly returned from her thoughts to reality, slowing down at a familiar turn. How long had she been at Carol's? The dashboard showed 4:20 p.m. More than 4 hours had already passed. Laura thought guiltily of Michael. He must be worried. However, when the Johnsons' house came into view, Laura saw something strange. There was a police car parked at the curb near their gate with its lights flashing. Laura's heart went cold with terror. She accelerated and soon came to a screeching halt right behind the police car. Michael stood on the porch of the house. His face was pale, his hair was tousled, as if he had run his fingers through it in anxiety more than once. Next to him was a tall police officer in uniform, holding a notepad. Laura jumped out of the car without even slamming the door. Michael, what happened? The husband turned at the sound of her voice. There was real horror in his eyes. Josh, he breathed out, and Laura understood from that one word. The worst had happened. Michael had been restless since Laura had left for her friend's house. The house seemed empty and quiet. He tried to distract himself with some chores. He cleared the breakfast table, washed the dishes, even vacuumed the living room to keep his hands busy. But his anxious thoughts wouldn't go away. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Michael glanced at his watch and remembered Josh. In the morning, his son had said he would be back after lunch. "It's about time," flashed through his mind. Deciding that it would be nice to cook something for a late lunch or early dinner, Michael rummaged around in the refrigerator and automatically began marinating chicken fillet. Another half-hour passed, and Josh still hadn't shown up. Michael wiped his hands and dialed his son's number. The beeps rang for a long time, but there was no answer. He glanced at the window. It was hot outside. Crickets were chirping in the grass, deserted. Maybe the boys were carried away by their project and were late. Michael decided to call Thomas, the friend Josh had gone to visit. Thomas's number was stored in the family phone. After a couple of rings, Thomas's mother picked up. "Mrs. Lee, good afternoon. This is Michael Johnson, Josh's father," he introduced himself. "Sorry to bother you. Is Josh still with you? He was supposed to be here this morning studying with Tom." There was a pause on the line. "Oh, Mr. Johnson." Mrs. Lee sounded surprised. "Josh? I haven't seen him today. Tom seemed to say that they were planning to meet, but Thomas went to a friend's library this morning to study for a history test. Perhaps they misunderstood each other." Michael tensed. Josh hadn't been to Tom's, it seemed. He managed a polite, "Oh, yeah, I see. It may indeed be a mistake. Sorry for disturbing you." As Michael hung up the phone, his heart sank. Josh lied about going to his friend's house. Where had he gone that morning? He dialed his son's number again, still no answer. He wrote him a message. "Josh, where are you? Call me back urgently." There was no answer for about 10 minutes. Michael walked around the kitchen, biting his lips from excitement. Scary pictures came into his head. Maybe the guy decided to skip the project and went for a ride with friends. Or, even worse, got involved with a bad crowd. No, Josh is a reasonable boy, although lately he has become withdrawn. Michael remembered the look on his son's face that morning when he asked if his parents were fighting. He thought he had convinced Josh that everything was fine. But what if the boy didn't believe him? What if he left home upset about their problems? By 3 o'clock in the evening, the anxiety had become unbearable. Michael stopped marinating the chicken, washed his hands, and resolutely took the car keys. He was not going to sit around and wait. First, he rode quickly to the skate park 2 blocks away. Josh sometimes met his classmates there. Empty. Then he hung around the mall. He often hung out there with his friends. No sign of him anywhere. Michael called his son every 5 minutes. Silence. No call, no message. He got home around 4 in the afternoon, sweating and almost panicking. His first impulse was to call Laura, but he didn't want to snap at her. She had only just begun to trust him, albeit a little. He was afraid to dump another problem on his wife. But when another quarter of an hour passed without news, Michael knew he couldn't wait any longer. He dialed 911. The police officer arrived fairly quickly 10 minutes after the call. A tall, black sergeant in uniform with a Williams name tag on his chest. He asked Michael about his son's appearance, his clothes, when and where he had gone, whether there had been any arguments. Michael was forced to admit that there had indeed been some tense conversations in the house that morning. Without going into detail, he only mentioned a family conflict that could have upset the teenager. The sergeant wrote it all down carefully. He was just finishing the last details when Laura's car pulled into the yard and stopped behind the police cruiser. Michael turned at the screech of brakes and saw his wife rushing toward them, her face terrified. "Michael, what happened?" Laura ran up the porch, leaving the unlocked car at the curb. Michael took a step toward her. His throat was dry, but he forced out, "Josh is missing. He hasn't returned. He's not answering his phone. I called the police." Laura turned as pale as a sheet. "Don't panic, madam," Sergeant Williams intervened calmly, turning to her. "We're checking the details. The descriptions have already been passed on to the patrols. Your son, how old is he? 16. Yes, Laura said barely audibly, looking from Michael to the officer. At this age, kids sometimes do stupid things, especially if they're stressed, the officer continued in a professional, reassuring tone. Most likely, he's with friends or in familiar places. He just forgot his phone or the battery died. Laura covered her mouth with her hand, holding back her sobs. Michael put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. He could feel her shaking. We've already given all the squads the description, Williams said. They're usually found within a few hours. The radio on the sergeant's belt muttered something inaudible. He took a step back, answering into the microphone. Laura looked up at Michael, her eyes full of tears and horror. How? How did this happen? He said to a friend. He didn't go to Tom, Michael answered hoarsely. I asked his mother. I don't know where he went. The phone's silent. Laura pressed her palms to her temples. Oh my God, it's because of us, right? He probably heard us arguing this morning. He thought we... Her voice broke. SHH. Michael hugged his wife tighter, although he himself was shaking. We don't know, but we'll find him. We'll find him. Do you hear? Laura sobbed and clung to her husband. Michael closed his eyes, praying in his heart for only one thing, that everything would be okay with his son. Sergeant Williams, meanwhile, having received a new answer on the radio, returned to them at a quick pace. Looks like we've got some news. A patrol reported a teenager matching the description seen about an hour and a half ago on Highway 16 near the lake exit. Near the lake? Michael asked again. Which lake? It's not far from here, 10 miles to the west, the officer explained. There's a bus stop there. A boy was seen nearby, as if he was trying to hitchhike. Hitchhiking? Laura turned even paler. They tried to drive up to him, but someone picked him up earlier. They saw the guy get into a passing car. These cars could not be detected. The patrol was on the opposite side of the highway and did not have time to turn around. Laura covered her face with her hands, and Michael felt everything inside him collapse. Josh got into some stranger's car. God, what was he planning? Go somewhere. Don't worry in advance. The sergeant raised his hands conciliatorily. The patrol noted that the guy stopped the car himself. That is, he was not pushed in by force. Most likely, he was driving voluntarily. We sent a description of the car to all the posts we are looking for. But where could he have gone? Michael breathed out, feeling his fingers grow cold. Further down the highway. It suddenly dawned on him. Route 16 led north to the neighboring state, exactly where Ashley College was located. Ashley, he cried. He might be trying to get to his sister. Ashley? Laura took her hands away from her face. Do you think it was her? That makes sense, Michael said quickly. If he was worried about us, he could have gone to his sister for advice, or even, I don't know, I expected to stay there. Ashley's school is only a couple of hours away. Laura seized on the thought. Yes, maybe he went to her. She pulled out her phone from her purse. I'll call her now. With trembling fingers, Laura dialed her daughter's number. A few agonizing seconds later, she spoke hurriedly. Ashley, honey, listen, has Josh come to see you? No? Maybe he called? Pause. Please, if he shows up or contacts you, let me know right away. We have an emergency. Michael stood nearby, trying to understand from his wife's face what his daughter was answering. Laura quickly ended the call. She doesn't know anything. She'll get scared now. Well, at least he'll be on guard, Michael said, trying to calm himself. He turned to the officer. Sergeant, is there a surveillance camera on that highway? The car that picked him up. I'm afraid the closest cameras are at the gas station across the lake, Williams replied. We're checking, but there's no guarantee we'll spot any. But the idea with the sister is smart. I'll tell them to look in that direction too. Laura pressed her hands to her chest in despair. We can't just sit there. Maybe we should go along the highway ourselves and look for. Yes, Michael picked up. We can drive to the college at the same time and look at. The officer thought for a moment, then nodded. In principle, there is no ban. Just stay in touch and do not act rashly. If you see your son or the car, call 911 immediately. Definitely, Michael nodded decisively. The sergeant handed them a business card. Here's my direct number. I'll try to keep you informed as soon as we find out anything. And you, if suddenly he gets in touch or someone tells you. Michael put the card in his jeans pocket and shook the officer's hand firmly. Thank you very much. We'll keep looking, Williams answered seriously. Hang in there. When the policeman left, Michael and Laura were already loading into the car. Michael got behind the wheel, his hands shaking slightly, but he had a goal in mind now, and that gave him strength. Laura sat next to him, pale, but pulled herself together. Let's go along the highway. Maybe we'll catch up. Let's go, Michael nodded, starting the engine. They sped out of the yard, heading out of town. Route 16 began after the bridge over the river, about 10 miles away. Michael kept his eyes on the road as he drove, praying that his son hadn't gone too far. Maybe he really is going to see his sister, Laura said quietly, clutching her phone. Do you think it's possible to get there by hitchhiking? Quite, Michael replied, weaving from lane to lane between slower cars. But if he got in about an hour and a half ago, hitchhiking in that time could have gotten him about 50 or 60 kilometers. Maybe they dropped him off at a gas station or a cafe along the way, she suggested. Maybe they dropped him off there and he's waiting for the next car. I hope so, Michael muttered. He didn't want to think about the bad things about the possibility that someone he shouldn't trust might be driving. He pushed those thoughts away with all his might. As they drove out of town and down the straight ribbon of highway, the sun was already setting in the west, blinding his eyes. Michael squinted, looking ahead both shoulders and the occasional adjacent exits. There were few cars at this hour. About 20 minutes later, Laura exclaimed and pointed ahead. Look, there's a gas station ahead. In the distance, tall signs and gas pumps of a roadside station really did loom. Both of their hearts began to beat faster. What if he was there? Michael pulled up the exit ramp to the gas station and stopped the car almost at the entrance to the local mini-mart. Laura jumped out first. Have you seen the boy? She asked the elderly cashier standing by the hot dog display case almost from the doorway. 16 years old, dark blonde, wearing a gray t-shirt. He could have walked in or out here. The woman blinked. A guy? Well, there are a lot of teenagers hanging around. And no, I don't remember anything like that today. Meanwhile, Michael glanced around the area. It was empty, only 2 truckers were fiddling around with a truck. He ran up to them just in case. Excuse me, did you give anyone a lift here an hour ago? A young guy in a t-shirt with a backpack. I really need to know. No, buddy, we didn't. One driver shook his head. The other also shrugged his shoulders. Laura stood by the car, her hands pressed to her chest, with despair on her face. He's not here. What should we do, Michael? He took his wife by the shoulders, trying not to show his own fear. Let's go further north. Maybe we caught up with them and overtook them. Suddenly, they stopped. Laura nodded. They started the car again and sped along the highway, looking at the sides of the road every moment, peering at the cars driving ahead. Another half-hour passed. They passed a small roadside motel, then a patch of woods. The sun was already beginning to set. The shadows were growing longer. Suddenly, Laura squeezed her husband's forearm tightly. Mike, look, on the right. I think it's him. Michael looked where his wife was pointing. His heart began to pound. At the very edge of the road, on the grassy shoulder, a teenager was walking along the forest belt with a backpack on his shoulders. Gray shorts, a gray t-shirt Josh. Even from afar, Michael recognized his son's figure. It's him, he breathed. Michael braked sharply and pulled off the road onto the shoulder, slightly ahead of the figure. Laura had already opened the door while the car was still rolling the last few meters. Joshua, she screamed, jumping out and rushing towards her son. Michael turned off the engine and jumped out after his wife, his legs barely obeying from the overwhelming relief and excitement. The son stopped when he saw his mother running toward him. Josh's face showed a mixture of surprise and fear. He threw his backpack off his shoulder as if preparing to fight back, but Laura was already hanging on his neck, hugging him tightly. "Josh, my boy," she repeated through her sobs. "Son, you've been found." Michael ran up a second later and pulled both of them, his wife and son, into an embrace that shook with emotion. Laura held her son tightly, as if afraid of losing him again. Josh stood tensely at first, but then he hugged his mother, burying his face in her shoulder. Michael wrapped his arms around them both, feeling tears of relief well up in his eyes. "I'm sorry," Josh said hoarsely, his voice shaking. "Forgive me." "We're the ones who should be asking for forgiveness, darling." Laura stroked his tangled hair. "We gave you such a fright. Lord, I'm so glad you were found." Michael, releasing them from his embrace, looked into his son's face. Josh's cheeks were wet. He had been crying. "Are you okay?" Michael asked hoarsely, putting his hands on his shoulders. "Are you hurt anywhere? Nothing happened to you?" Josh shook his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "It's okay," he sobbed. He fell silent, looking down. Laura and Michael exchanged a brief glance. "Get in the car," Michael said gently. "Let's talk calmly. It's dangerous here by the road." Together, they led Josh to their car. Laura sat her son in the back seat and sat down next to him, holding his hand. Michael turned around and drove back toward the house. Thank God, Josh had been found, and there was no need to rush anywhere at random. For a while, there was silence in the car, only the wheels rustling on the highway. Michael slowed down. There was no need to hurry now. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror at his son. Josh was sitting with his back against the door, his head down. Laura had her arm around his shoulders. "Son, tell us what happened," Laura began softly, breaking the silence. "Why did you leave? Your dad and I were about to go crazy." Josh sniffed and didn't answer right away. Finally, he said quietly, "I heard you arguing this morning." Laura closed her eyes. After all, he had overheard her and Michael yelling at each other. "I didn't mean to," Josh quickly added, catching her gesture. "I just woke up to your voices. You were talking about divorce, I think." There was such fear in her son's voice that Laura wanted to hug him tighter again. She glanced at Michael, who squinted painfully but continued to look at the road. "We did argue very loudly," Laura admitted. "Forgive us." "This was adult stuff," Michael added, clearing his throat. "We should have kept our voices down. And you probably didn't hear it the way it was. We don't want a divorce, son." Josh looked up at him. "Really? But my mother said this morning, I don't know if I want to." He stopped short, apparently recalling her words word for word. Laura felt guilty. Yes, in the heat of the moment, she herself did not know what she wanted, and it burst out in front of her son. "I was very upset then," she said softly, "and I said too much. Dad and I." She fell silent, searching for simpler words. "We're going through a tough time right now," Michael continued. "Everyone goes through that, even adults. But we're working on it, and we love each other very much." Laura smiled gratefully at her husband and turned back to her son. "Yes, honey, everything will be fine with Dad and me. It's just that sometimes close people can quarrel too. It doesn't mean that the family is falling apart." "We're all for keeping our family strong," Michael confirmed firmly. "And it's certainly not because of you or Ashley. You're not to blame for anything." Josh listened with his head down. Laura patted his back. "You were scared, weren't you?" He nodded slightly. I've never heard you yell at each other like that." His voice broke again. "I thought maybe I did something wrong. Or maybe you really were going to break up, and then everything would fall apart." "No, no," Laura shook her head, holding back tears herself. "We're not getting a divorce, and you have nothing to do with it. It was just a complicated situation that we didn't immediately discuss calmly." "The situation with my job," Michael interjected. "I didn't tell my mom, but I got fired a couple of weeks ago. Can you imagine? What a fool." Josh looked up from the floor and looked at his father in surprise. Were you fired? I didn't know. Nobody knew except a couple of my colleagues, Michael sighed, meeting his son's gaze in the mirror. I hid it from everyone, even from my mother, and that's how I got us all into this state. Josh blinked, processing what he heard. This morning, Dad and I finally figured it all out, Laura explained. I was really mad at him for keeping this secret, but we've already made up. You just heard the moment when we didn't have time yet. Yeah, Josh said. He squeezed his mother's hand tighter. I was so scared. I ran to Ashley, thinking maybe I could stay with her if you had, well, oh, silly, Laura pressed his head to her shoulder. Don't do that again, please. Whatever happens, always talk to us. We are your parents. We will try to solve everything together. Yeah, Michael nodded. You're a grown man now, Josh, but even grown men need support when they feel down. We have each other and always will, okay? Josh silently buried his nose in his mother's shoulder. I'm sorry, he whispered again. I was acting like a little child. Quiet, Laura said, stroking him. You behaved normally. It's our fault. Of course, Michael agreed. You've held on really well. Someone else in your place would have gotten worried even earlier. The son smiled timidly with the corner of his lips. For the first time during the entire conversation. By this time, the car had reached its hometown. The sun had almost set. The sunset was blazing in the sky, painting the clouds golden pink. Maybe we should stop for a bite to eat on the way, Michael suggested after a pause, glancing at his wife and son. I heard that teenagers like pizza to relieve stress. Josh chuckled softly. Laura smiled gratefully at her husband, who was trying to lighten the mood. Pizza would be fine, Josh quietly agreed. Great. Michael drove the car towards a familiar pizzeria on the next street. You know, after all the stress, I also got an appetite. The pizzeria was not very busy. Sunday evening is not the busiest. They sat at a corner table. While they waited for their order, Laura and Michael kept an eye on their son, asking him every now and then if he was feeling okay, if he wanted a drink, if his feet were sore. Josh sheepishly assured them that everything was fine. When the large pizza and soda arrived, Josh, finally hungry, began to devour piece after piece. His parents watched with relief as his initially pale face regained its healthy glow. Laura wanted to endlessly run her fingers through his curly hair, like in childhood, but she only lightly touched his hand. She was afraid to smother him with care. She still couldn't believe that this nightmare was behind her. Her son was nearby, alive and well. Their family was together. While Josh went to the bathroom, Michael quietly said to his wife, "Thank you." Laura turned around in surprise. For what? He tugged at the edge of a paper napkin, looking at the table. For not blaming me now. After all, it was my lie that started everything. Today, I seem to have turned half gray. There were deep shadows at the corners of his eyes. The worry for their son had taken a toll on both of them, Laura thought. She covered her husband's hand with her palm. Let's not make any claims against each other now. It's all over now. We found our boy, that's the main thing. Michael turned his palm over and intertwined his fingers with hers, squeezing them slightly. I'm so glad you were there. I don't know what I would have done alone. SHH, Laura smiled softly. That's enough. We're in this together, Mike. He looked up at her and smiled back, warm and familiar, though tired. Laura felt a familiar warmth in her chest. Now, having experienced such a shock and having found Josh together, it seemed to her that her love for this man had become even stronger. They drove their son home. Josh was nodding off in the back seat, tired from a stressful day. At home, he went upstairs, and Laura insisted that he take a warm shower to wash off the road dust and relax a little. Josh didn't argue. While he was splashing around in the bathtub, Laura prepared a clean bed for him and also grabbed some calming herbal drops from the medicine cabinet. They sometimes helped her son fall asleep during exam stress. Josh came out soon after, dressed in pajama shorts and a t-shirt. His hair was still damp, his face was tired. Laura kissed his forehead. "Try to sleep, dear. Drink about 20 drops. You'll feel better." She handed him a spoon with passion flower tincture. Josh took the dose obediently, though he winced at the bitter taste. "Mom, Dad," he muttered, crawling under the blanket. "Sorry again." SHH, Laura tucked him higher. "You need to rest. Everything is fine." Michael sat down on the edge of the bed and gently patted his son on the shoulder. "We love you, Josh. Sleep well, do you hear? We're here for you." The guy nodded, already closing his eyes. Literally a couple of minutes later, as soon as they turned off the night light and went out, he fell into a deep sleep so many worries had exhausted the teenager. Laura closed the door to his room. Michael was waiting for her in the hallway. They both felt at the same time how exhausted they were. But at the same time, there was relief and quiet joy in their souls. Everything had ended well. Michael put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Well, shall we go and rest too?" "Let's go," she agreed with a tired smile. In her bedroom, Laura mechanically began to clear away the clothes that had been scattered around the chair that morning, but Michael intercepted her hands. "Not now. The house can wait." He pulled her gently towards him. Laura looked up at her husband, and suddenly there was a lump in her throat. Only now, after hours of stress, did she realize what they had been through. Her lips trembled. "Hey, hey," Michael whispered, noticing her condition. "Everything's fine, darling." He held her tightly, and Laura pressed her forehead to his chest. His heart was beating steadily and calmly after everything. She closed her eyes, listening to the sound. "I love you," she said quietly. Michael stroked her back. "I love you too, Laura." They stood there for a few minutes, just sharing the silent happiness that they still had each other. Laura felt safe in his arms in a way she hadn't felt in the last few turbulent weeks. Yes, the difficulties wouldn't disappear with a wave of his hand, but together they could get through this. Finally, she raised her head. Michael leaned down and kissed her gently on the lips. Laura responded, hugging her husband tighter around the waist. The kiss was not hot, without stormy passion, rather, filled with warmth and tenderness, and that made it even more precious. "Thank you," Laura whispered, pulling back slightly to look him in the eyes. "For what?" Michael smiled. "For giving me back my sense of security," she admitted. "Now I know we really can overcome this." "We will overcome," he confirmed, gently touching her lips with his again. Laura pulled her husband toward the bed. Tonight was their first quiet night in a long time. The moon was shining outside the window, and the room was silent. Before turning off the night light, Laura silently thanked fate that this day had ended well. Their family was together, and that meant that many more happy days were waiting for them ahead. They just had to try for it. With this thought, she finally allowed herself to let go of all her worries and fall asleep peacefully in his warm arms. A few months later, the Johnsons' living room was softly lit by table lamps. Outside, the first snow of the early evening was falling, large flakes swirling slowly outside the window. The air was filled with the delicious aroma of roast turkey and spices. The whole family gathered around the festively set table. Michael sat at the head of the table, Laura was on his right, and their daughter Ashley, who had arrived from college on vacation the day before, was on his left. Josh was sitting next to Laura, smiling. He had recovered vigorously from the recent events, and was now animatedly telling his sister about his school victories. Tonight was a special night, Thanksgiving. This year, the Johnsons felt a special reason to be grateful. "Mom, this smells divine," Ashley announced, inhaling the aroma as Laura set a platter of crispy turkey on the table. "I've missed your cooking so much. We can't eat anything like this in the dorms." Laura smiled and patted her daughter's chestnut hair. "Eat to your heart's content, my dear. You've become so beautiful. College is obviously doing you good." Ashley gave a sly wink. "Studying is studying, but a home-cooked dinner is sacred." Josh was already reaching for his favorite corn casserole, but Michael raised his hand, stopping him. "Wait, family. Before we pounce on the treats, let's say a few words of gratitude, as is tradition." Ashley and Josh respectfully put down their utensils. Laura sat down next to her husband, placing her hand on his arm in support. Michael looked around at the family and quietly cleared his throat. This year has been, let's say, difficult for us, he began quietly. And it's all the more valuable that we are sitting at the same table today together, healthy and happy. He took a breath and continued, looking at Laura. I want to thank my wife for her wisdom, patience, and love. We have been together for so many years, but it is as if I have once again realized how strong and kind she is. Laura smiled shyly, feeling warmth spreading in her chest. Michael squeezed her hand tighter. Also, thank you to my children. Michael turned to his son and daughter. For having you. You are our pride. Ashley, you are doing so well in school. We are happy with every success you have. Josh, you have matured lately, become more responsible, we have noticed it. Thank you for supporting us and forgiving our mistakes. Ashley smiled touchedly at her father's words. Josh blushed slightly from embarrassment and looked down, but it was clear that he was pleased. And finally, Michael raised his glass of apple cider. Thank you to this life for the second chance it gave us, for the opportunity to become better and stronger as a family. I promise that I will personally do everything to justify your trust every day from now on. Laura's eyes watered. Ashley discreetly wiped away a tear. Josh looked at his parents with a beaming gaze. I love you, Michael added quietly, finishing his speech. We love you too, Dad. Josh was the first to respond, banging his glass of juice against his father's glass. Ashley and Laura did the same, clinking glasses and exchanging smiles. The four of them sipped from their glasses. The drinks were non-alcoholic. As Laura had requested, she had avoided even wine for now, out of concern for her nerves, and she was already feeling drunk with happiness. Now we can eat, Michael announced cheerfully. Hooray! Josh attacked the turkey with gusto, cutting off a large piece for himself. Laura served the children's side dishes and poured cranberry sauce for everyone. Every now and then she glanced at Michael, who was beaming with a quiet, calm joy. He had grown younger in recent months. He had taken a new job as head of sales at Integrate Tech, where Jennifer had recommended him. He had started with enthusiasm and had already managed to close a couple of big deals, which he modestly talked about at home, keeping his promise to be frank. Laura saw how his favorite business had restored her husband's former energy, and she herself had changed. Thanks to Carol, Laura had the courage to return to work. She had taken a part-time position at her home library. At first, she was nervous. So many years had passed. But as soon as she plunged back into the world of catalogs and readers, she seemed to come alive again. Now Laura happily spent several days a week among books, and the rest of the time she continued to take care of the house. The balance suited everyone. Laura glanced at the children. They were teasing each other. Ashley shared stories from her college days. Josh cracked jokes. After the stressful period, her son seemed to have matured and began to talk more openly about his feelings. He discussed the recent situation with them, and with a psychologist at school at their request. The school counselor met with Josh several times to make sure he was not traumatized. Fortunately, everything worked out. The teenager learned his lesson. He had caused a lot of trouble by running away, and he did not want to experiment anymore. Mom, pass the salad, please. Ashley's voice pulled Laura out of her reverie. Of course, dear, she smiled and handed over a large wooden salad bowl. Ashley gave her mother a sharp look. You're so happy today, Mom. You're practically glowing. Laura pressed her palm sensitively to her cheek, embarrassed. Is that bad? No, that's great, the daughter laughed. I'm glad to see you like this. Everything's just fine now, that's why it's glowing. Josh winked at his sister and turned to his mother. Mom, keep it up. Stop teasing Mom, Michael interceded cheerfully. Otherwise, she might even blush. Laura did indeed blush, but with joy. She saw that the children understood how the mood in the house had changed. Trust and warmth reigned there now, instead of the recent coldness and tension. Dinner was coming to an end. Everyone had eaten their fill and talked to their heart's content. Ashley helped her mother clear the plates from the table, and Josh volunteered to wash the dishes, this time voluntarily. "The boy is growing up," Michael quietly remarked, watching his son carefully wash the casserole dish. "Of course," Laura answered just as quietly, pressing herself against her husband's shoulder. "He's a smart guy." Michael put his arm around her waist. A jazz tune began to play softly from the stereo system, a playlist prepared for the day of the holiday. "Shall we dance?" Michael suddenly suggested, looking into his wife's eyes. Laura raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Right now?" "Why not?" He smiled warmly. "It's been a while since I asked you to dance." There was plenty of room in the living room. Laura nodded, feeling a pleasant thrill. "Kids will just be a minute," Michael said jokingly, leading his wife to the center of the room. "Hey, we see everything," Ashley announced, but there was satisfaction in her voice. Michael and Laura stood opposite each other. He took her right hand in his and gently placed the other on her waist. Laura placed her other hand on his shoulder. To the light overflows of jazz, they slowly, in unison, spun around. Laura raised her face to her husband. "It's crazy. We haven't danced for probably 10 years. "Well, it's time to catch up," he responded and gently pressed her closer. She laughed. Behind her, through the kitchen door, she could hear the children whispering quietly, probably discussing their parents. But Laura didn't care now. She felt like she was at her junior prom, dancing with Michael for the first time. "I'm glad it worked out for us," she whispered, resting her head on his chest as they continued to sway gently in time. "Me too, my love," he answered just as quietly. "We made it." Music flowed softly, and outside the windows, myriads of snowflakes fell from the black sky. The Johnsons' home was warm and peaceful. The family ended the day with a feeling of love and gratitude for each other. And even though new trials awaited them, like all people, now they knew for sure. Together they could overcome anything. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.